Leadership is hard, but we're here for you. I'm Sean Frederick, and this is Growth Beyond Limits, the podcast for leaders. Just a reminder that we believe in leadership. This podcast focuses on discussing leadership experiences from real leaders in various industries and sectors. We encourage transparent discussion that allows our listeners and viewers to be more successful in their own leadership journey. No theory, no guesses, no nonsense, just leadership that works. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and get started with episode 5, something that we're going to call Did You Know That You Were a Leader? And I'm joined today with our special guest, Therese Quinn. Therese, why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself?
Hi, I'm Therese Quinn. I worked at the health district in Snohomish County for about 15 years. I've worked in nonprofit and government organizations. Currently, I'm an instructor at Wichita State University and a consultant in the field of emergency management.
Awesome. So did you know that you were a leader? And with this topic, you and I have had some conversations before, and we've talked about the fact that not everyone in a leadership position necessarily sees themselves as a leader. Many people experience imposter syndrome or just simply don't recognize that they're in a leadership role. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience leading the Medical Reserve Corps through COVID-19?
Well, I don't think we have that much time, but it was very much life-changing for me as well as the volunteers. And I'd been leading the Medical Reserve Corps volunteers for almost 15 years, over 10 years at that time. And we had really developed into a corps that people could rely on. If you're not familiar with the Medical Reserve Corps, they're volunteers that some of them are doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals. Some of them are support staff. And the volunteers will come out for trainings and exercises, getting them ready. They'll also come out and do response work. And they are so reliable and so amazing. And they had come out to work for all kinds of different events throughout the years. So I knew when I called them up regarding what we didn't call it COVID at that time, because we had the very first documented case of COVID in the United States, right in our county. And it had not become public yet, but we knew that as soon as it did become public, that people were going to be calling us up and asking us questions. So we needed to have some people ready to answer. And I sent out an email to all of the volunteers saying, we need people for an operation. I can't tell you anything more about it. Here are for what's going on. Please come in if you can. And we filled up the emergency call center very quickly with people who knew how to answer that phone because they'd done it before. And that's how the whole operation, our volunteers worked in every aspect just about of the response. They worked in logistics. They took specimens to the lab. They worked in the testing center, the vaccination centers, at the hospital and screening sites. I mean, like all over the place. They were very reliable. They are amazing people.
Okay. Well, I want to go back to something you said earlier that I think is really interesting. You were calling volunteers. So these are people who had no requirement to show up, and you were asking them to come in without being able to tell them what was going on or what sort of work they would be doing. So that had to be a challenging situation to sort of get people motivated to participate in. So how do you lead people to perform work when you can't necessarily tell them what they're going to be doing? How do you get them motivated to want to be a part of something like that?
Well, half of the work is kind of done because the people that volunteer for the Medical Reserve Corps are already interested in the topic. They want to help people. They understand that it's going to be high stress. And then what we do is we give them more training. And part of that training is to let them know that the things that they are going to be working on, they may be told, you can't tell anybody about this, that it is confidential. So they know at the beginning that they might get called in knowing what they're responding to. We had a similar kind of thing happen in 2014. There was a massive mudslide that happened in our county. And it had not hit the news yet. But we had no idea how many people were impacted by this. So we just put the call out. We need people to come to the emergency call center. Please respond if you can. To this emergency, we can't tell you anything more. I mean, like everybody called up and like, what is it? I'm like, can't tell you anything more. So a lot of people but they still did because they knew that I wasn't going to call them up for anything at the last minute unless it was super important. So working with a volunteer, it was different than working with employees, I think, because there was a lot more of a personal relationship. It's not exactly personal, but I trusted the volunteers trusted me because when you're working in this field of emergency management and healthcare, you have to trust each other because the situations are are scary. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a disease or a mudslide. Both of them are dangerous and scary. And you have to know that the people who are telling you what to do have your back. And that's what I think it is building that trust throughout the relationship.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that. I had a guest last week and from a completely different world, actually from healthcare directly, dental care specifically. And she mentioned the importance of building trust and how trust will ultimately result in people being willing to go above and beyond to do what you need them to do in the moment. But I want to go all the way back because it's really interesting. I personally don't have any relationship with the Medical Reserve Corps, and I'm curious to know what led you to participate in the Medical Reserve Corps. And was there a process where you started as a volunteer? Did you rise through the ranks? Was it a job assignment because of where you worked? How did that take place? How did you end up being the person responsible for leading the Medical Reserve Corps at the health district where you worked?
Well, I was out of a job for one thing, and this job came up and it just sounded so interesting because I have always been interested in emergency preparedness. I'm a child of the 60s. When the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, I was a kid in school. I'll never forget, preparing to I have no idea what it was, the end of the world or something, but I know that preparedness was one of the values we had as a kid. And then back in the 90s, they had a community emergency response team, and they call it CERT for short. And my girlfriend and I took the course, and it trains you to essentially become a responder in your neighborhood before, if you had a big disaster kind of thing, before the fire department can get there. And I always wanted to do something more with that. And when I heard about the Medical Reserve Corps, I didn't even know that the MRC was a thing until I saw this job. And I was so excited because this was something that I could take that CERT training that I had and move it forward into that. And somehow, for some reason, they selected me to run that. And it's really the best job I ever had.
That's really interesting. For me, I think that I would generally say that being in the Navy was probably the best job I ever had. But I certainly enjoyed the time that I spent interacting with public health. A little curious, you mentioned two very distinct events, both a major mudslide and the COVID-19, obviously the COVID pandemic. So, in between those times, what are you doing as a leader to make sure that your volunteers are prepared, that they're ready to respond in a moment's notice?
Well, we met regularly. One of the things that I've always had the volunteers know is that they can contact me anytime. A lot of them, I know we're supposed to do that, but they had my personal cell phone and they would call me and say, "Hey, did you know?" And that's actually, I mean, this is the truth. That's actually how I found out about the mudslide because I had a volunteer who was listening to the radio and search and rescue was doing an exercise that morning and they saw the slide. And so he called me to let me know what was going on. So we had this relationship where they felt they could talk to me and I talked to them. But we also had trainings, lots and lots of, actual classroom trainings. But then we also had training exercises that always had an element of fun in it. I mean, they have to because these are volunteers. They don't have to go to this. There was no requirement that you have to do anything. So we did things that would help the volunteers be more prepared in actual disasters. We staffed the cold weather shelters. I'm not sure how fun that was, but it did give people that warm feeling that really was a lot of what this is about. We staffed the lost person station at the fair that would help us to be able to work in reunification centers, did first aid stations and health screening stations with different partners. So all of that, you get out in the public, you get to meet people, you get to see people that have different opportunities than we have. And it just really builds your view of everybody. And again, it has that warm, fuzzy feeling that helps in there. But we did all of these different things all the time. I mean, the volunteers actually were like, how come we're not doing the health fair that we usually do at this time of the year? I mean, they looked forward to different kinds of events. We went to festivals where we would set up stations that, take people's blood pressure. But so like we went to the Nubian Jam, we went to the Latino Festival. I mean, so there were those were definitely fun things. There's music and food and all of that kind of stuff. And so all of those things had a positive glow to it, that it wasn't dangerous or anything like that. But everybody knew that those things were preparing them to be able to work in disasters.
Along those lines, having all those varied experiences, different types of events, do you feel that that helped keep people motivated or aligned to the ultimate goal, which was to help people during emergency situations?
Yes, because I mean, I talked with the volunteers a lot. I mean, when you're sitting at a first aid station where no one gets hurt, you have a lot of downtime. So, and that's another thing. If at all possible, I went to every single event that we had. I was there as the team lead. Sometimes we had 2 or 3 events at the same time, so that wasn't possible. So I was able to interact. I was able to see those volunteers that did have leadership skills, and I was able to. I mean, that really, really helped when we were doing like during COVID. I had volunteers all over the county and sometimes in another county doing stuff. And so we were able to place those people that we knew, we could count on to lead other people and had that ability. So in those downtimes, really talking to people and like I said, the only reason people joined MRC was because they had an interest in responding. And they understood. They all were like preparedness geeks like me, a lot of them, I guess. But that's what they wanted to do. One of the things that all of the volunteers knew, and I really, really trained hard on this, was never, ever self-deploy. Because, I mean, that does happen in that field where people are like, hey, I'm going to go help. And it's not a good idea. But our volunteers knew that. What they would do is if they saw something going on, they would call me up and they're like, hey, are we going to get called to help out in this? Because I'm ready. So yeah, they were always ready. They knew what the big picture was. They knew why we were there. I mean, there's all kinds of other volunteer opportunities where you can go to festivals and different kind of things like that. But the MRC is unique because of our mission. And that's why they joined. They were always aware of it. And I mean, I can't say that every single person in the Medical Reserve Corps, some people joined for different reasons, but I would say the majority of the people who joined for those reasons.
Okay. So there's certainly an element where people sort of have their personal values, their vision, and they see the Medical Reserve Corps in alignment with those. So as a leader, because clearly you were the leader of the Medical Reserve Corps, whether you recognized it at the moment or not, when you were in the midst of a response, certainly that can be taxing to your volunteers. Did you do anything special to keep them motivated in the moment, or did you have any special tools that you used to address any sort of mental fatigue or compassion fatigue, all the variations of dealing with the stress of the moment? How did you manage that as a leader?
That's a really good question. One of the trainings that we had all the time, and the volunteers would ask for them and take it over and over again, was the psychological first aid. It's a training that NACCHO and SAMHSA and some other great organizations put together quite a few years ago. And it gives you concrete tools on how to address emotional trauma, both in survivors and also for your own self, and really stress those those things. But then we also, whenever people were deployed or activated to go, we always let people know, take care of yourself. Or we reminded them of some of those key things in there for self-care that, you do need to put your oxygen mask on first. You have to take care of yourself. So we remind them of that. And then after every event, not like the fair, but like after the mudslide, after these different kinds of incidents, we would have a debriefing. It was never mandatory. These are volunteers. Some we reminded people you can always call me, if you have there's different kinds of resources. We tried to normalize as much as we can calling a counselor if you need to, because that's what we're asking survivors to do. So we need to follow our own lead. And so we would have these debriefing sessions. It was really challenging in COVID because usually when you have a response, it's like you go out. I mean, the mudslide was probably the longest one we'd ever had because we had people activated for quite a while in that response, like months. But COVID took it a little bit further and it was more like years. So, and then the added thing was that with COVID, that we couldn't all get in a room and hug each other because that's lots of times what happened in the debriefs. We did throughout COVID, we always had Zoom meetings, of course, and I always let people know, if you are stressed out, if you're having an issue, if you see something at a site that you're working at, that you can always call me. And they were not shy about calling me and telling me, this is not working. You need to fix this. Just calling up and crying on the phone. Because I mean, that stuff happens. If you don't have anybody to talk to, it can make it even more stressful. Anyway, so what we did, and I cannot remember the exact date, because we recognized we need to have some kind of an in-person meeting. It was further along in COVID where it was safe to do that. We had, space between every person that was there. We got quite a few people in a gigantic room and they talked about it. And I will never forget that because people talked about how the reasons that they were there. Things like people were saying, I'm not going to stop volunteering for this until this disease is gone from our community. I'm not giving up. I'm doing this for my family. I'm doing this for my neighborhood, my community. People were so empowered and they talked about all of the different things, all the different emotions that they had experienced. Excuse me. So those kind of things are super important to be having, because one of the things that does happen, and I experienced this with my daughter, she experienced it and told me about it. When we were working the slide, my daughter, she was in her 20s then, and she came in and worked right next to me as a volunteer, helping out. Excuse me. I mean, it really impacts you when you're working on a response. And you kind of have this idea in the back of your head that everybody was impacted. Everybody. So sorry. I'm going to have a cup of coffee. So then she went back to college. She went back to the community college. And you know how the kids were all talking. And she'd be like, so, what did you do over break or whatever? And she said, well, I helped out on the slide that happened. And all of her students are like, what are you talking about? Well, there was this big mudslide that happened and all these people were killed. I don't know what you're talking about. When she came home, she was so upset that these other students did not have the awareness that she had. So there was nobody, it's really hard sometimes to find somebody who understands what you went through unless they went through it too.
Well, you mentioned that you're not with the Medical Reserve Corps any longer, that you are you're an educator now. So why don't you tell us a little bit about leading in that environment? Because of course the educator is leading the classroom.
Well, it's a remote class and it's on emergency management. And I know that I went to college late, like when I was in my 50s. So it's not that long ago. But one of the things that I remember from those courses, because I took remote classes as well, was I wanted to take the classes to learn stuff and become excited about the topic. Of course, I wanted to get an A, but I wanted the instructor to have my success as what their success is. And that's what I was trying to do. So sorry about that. In the class. as you know, I'm excited about the field of emergency management. I think it's a really cool thing to do. So I wanted to inspire that in the students. For whatever reason that they had come in there, I wanted to have them be excited about it, even if they decided they weren't going to work in that field. And so when I wrote up my lectures, all of the different kinds of things that I've done is trying to inspire people to get excited about the field. I try to answer their emails as quickly as possible, get back to them. I want every single one to be successful. I mean, like when I'm grading assignments, I'm like, I want you to have an A. So I put out different announcements trying to help people get to that A. So anybody who, I don't know, but that's what I want. I want to build the excitement around the field to inspire people to just understand what it's about.
Okay. So, is an educator preparing people for their upcoming careers or helping create new insights in their current careers? I guess I would ask, do you have any tips for new emergency managers, Medical Reserve Corps, volunteers, or leaders, things that you would share from your experiences that would help them be more successful in theirs?
Stay on top of the field, get connected with organizations because the field does change. And I mean, the basics are the same, but the way that people are approaching things does change. And it is really important to stay up with different things that are happening. Stay connected with the people that you knew and make new connections with people. I think that is the hugest part of it, just so that you know what is going on. And don't be afraid to do something that you've never done before. I mean, yeah, of course, I've been afraid, but push past the fear and do it because you'll get something out of it.
Okay. So those all sound like wonderful tips for all the new and upcoming emergency managers and Medical Reserve Corps leaders that are out there and potentially listening across the platform. Take heed, and if you have any feedback or comments or questions, you can certainly send those to me on any of the platforms. And of course, every seventh episode is really dedicated to responding to the feedback that we receive from the audience. So with that, I want to thank you, Teresa, for joining us today. I always love learning from all of your insights and your experiences. One of the most deployed emergency managers that I know personally. So I always learn something new whenever time I get a chance to speak with you.
Okay.
So with that, we'll wrap up this episode of Growth Beyond Limits, the podcast for leaders, and we'll wish everyone a great day. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.